States Army to low-intensity conflict and altruistic interventions in other people's countries. On the contrary, he kept focusing Army thinking on a future war of decision that would influence global development and the position of the United States as a great power. Finally, in your lifetimes, very shortly, I suspect over the next few years, we will leave Afghanistan and Iraq. We'll leave. We leave lots of places. I suspect we'll leave Korea because there's really no justification for a large ground contingent there anymore. And increasingly, the Koreans want us out. And I think it'll be very difficult to maintain our position in Europe. But homeland defense, right here, right now, is becoming enormously important. Every day, while you sit here, there are literally hundreds of semi-submersibles. These are like submarines that ride about 18 inches off the surface of the water. They're about 70, 80 feet long. They carry thousands of pounds of narcotics, or people, or both. And they land in the port of San Diego. They land in Mobile Bay. They land along the coast of Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, and they disgorge these narcotics and people. And we don't know who the people are. Some of these people are not from Latin America. Some of these people are from other places. And this is an international transportation cartel that works for the drug cartel and the emerging criminal states in Latin America that are increasingly under the control and influence of large criminal organizations. They're not only shipping people up here and narcotics, but we're beginning to wonder if they're not also shipping other kinds of things. Perhaps people infected with diseases. Perhaps weapons of mass destruction, whatever that turns out to be. And they're pouring into the United States, and the Coast Guard, believe it or not, is undermanned. And these things are impossible to detect. You're lucky if you find one. We only think we find about 20% of the narcotics that come up through Mexico and through these littoral waters, these coastal waters of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a war. This is a very serious war. Much more serious threat to the United States, its economic health, and our population than what's happening overseas. You are going to witness this, and you're going to watch it become very important over the next few years. So you're going to end up as Army officers defending the continental United States, which is not a new mission. It's a very old mission. It's a very valid mission, and it's a very important one. We're headed in that direction. So these are my comments and the quick briefing. I hope this was interesting for you, and I hope you have some questions. Thank you.
Sir, Cadet Jeff Laughlin, Company F1. It might
Cadet
be a little
what?
bit of a Laughlin,
Okay.
F1. It's
I
just,
thought you said flunk, cadet
No.
flunk. Right?
hopefully not.
Okay.
It sort of seems like what you're saying is that instead of spending $1 trillion projecting our military power into sort of the back corners of the world, that we should have gone to more of an isolationist strategy and beefed up our borders. And if that's so, then how do you view that in your other sort of proposition that future wars are going to be about resources? And the common view in, say, I know Russia, is that the U.S. basically went to Iraq to get the oil.
Well, first of all, there's no such thing as an isolationist foreign policy. Never was. It's just that you've always had people in the United States who questioned our engagement in conflicts and places that we didn't think we belonged in. I mean, the first and the most important intervention that produced an enormous outcry in the United States was the Philippines. Because after we sank the Spanish fleet, we made the decision to move in and occupy the Philippines. And the Filipinos, who had been fighting for their freedom, initially looked upon us as allies in the creation of an independent state. We ended up killing a couple of 100,000 Filipinos and crushing them so that we could control the place. And that was a disaster. In fact, Teddy Roosevelt later said he wished we hadn't gone in there at all. The next outcry came with World War I. This country was not at all enthusiastic about intervention in the First World War. And one of the reasons that you get an unbroken 12-year period of Republican government is that Woodrow Wilson and the Democrats were blamed for the pointless intervention in the First World War, because when people came back, they realized, the American soldiers, millions of them, why did we go? What was the point? Why did we sacrifice hundreds of thousands of lives on the battlefields of Europe? The Germans and the Austrians were not really our enemies. We were saving British and French imperialism. Why did we do it? So we lurched away from interventionism into that. What I'm talking about now is very different. What I'm suggesting is that, first of all, we're in the middle of a financial crisis. We cannot afford to spend on the scale that we have. Up until now, while we were very prosperous, billions of dollars would disappear into places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and quite frankly, it didn't matter. Nobody cared. As long as you didn't take very heavy casualties, it was irrelevant to the average American. It's not true anymore. We can't afford that. We're reaching the point where we simply cannot print and buy money, or excuse me, borrow money in perpetuity. So we've got to make some decisions. My point is, we need to back away from engagement in these areas where there's no profit. Because if you were simply interested in oil, Saddam Hussein would have sold all the oil to you that you wanted at the lowest possible price. And you don't need to park a tank on top of an oil well to get the oil out. They'll sell it to you. They have nothing else to sell. These are single commodity markets and economies. So it's a matter of backing away and deciding when you will engage and when you will not. And that was the success story for the British Empire. That until 1914, when it made this disastrous decision to intervene on the continent in World War I and destroyed its empire, destroyed its prosperity, destroyed its wealth, up until that point, Britain was a very successful commercial organization, and its empire was all about profit. But the British were very careful about when they engaged, where they engaged, and how much was invested in the engagement, because the interest was, once again, not spending where you didn't have to in terms of blood and treasure. We need to think about the British approach and apply it to our own thinking, and think carefully about our own prosperity, our own security over the long term, because your military power rests on that foundation of economic security. Without the economic prosperity, your military power will simply decline, as the Russians discovered in the Soviet Union, until you collapse. We don't want to go down that road. Next question.
So are we going here?
Yeah.
Sir Cadet Wood, I was wondering, you mentioned like an Indo-Pakistani war, maybe in the near future. I was thinking, what is your opinion on what kind of U.S. involvement should be, how the U.S. should be involved in that war, if any, and how do you think it will actually play out? So like your opinion, and what do you think will actually happen?
Well, first of all, bear in mind that Pakistan, this artificial state structure, is a legacy of the British Empire. It has been falling apart for 50 years. It is full of 125 million unhappy Muslims of different types and kinds, but large blocks of them. Your friends, the Pathans that we call the Pashtun right now, have been there forever. They are behaving today as they did 20 years ago and 200 years ago. No changes. What is happening in that country has very little to do with us, almost nothing at all. And quite frankly, if India and Pakistan were to go to war, the best thing we could do is not be part of it, but sit on the periphery and work closely with Iran, Russia, and India, all three of whom have vital strategic interests in Afghanistan and Pakistan. We do not. There are no vital strategic interests in those places. Our only real compelling interest is in ensuring that the nuclear weapons on the ground in Pakistan are not proliferated, that control is maintained, and they are not given to the wrong people, so to say. The wrong people can be lots of people, by the way. Don't just limit your thinking to this group, Al-Qaeda, living in a cave in northwest Pakistan. There are lots of other people that would like to get their hands on those things. What you should also understand is that those weapons are targeted right now by the Russians. And the Russians are likely to pull the trigger on a nuclear strike to destroy those weapons faster than we are. We're not the only players. We're not the only ones with interests. We need to back away from this notion that we have to be involved in everything. There are times when we don't need to be, and there are times when our non-involvement can be a huge strategic advantage. And again, I go back to the British example. You can influence events without directly engaging, in most cases, with your armed forces. Next question.
Sir, Cadet Cross, earlier you were talking about your climate of conformity, where people